everyone, and welcome to the webcast, Never Let Malware Make Your System Rotten to the Core, sponsored by Merlin International and McAfee. My name is Doug Amder, and I am a marketing manager at Merlin International. I'll be the moderator for this webcast. Participant audio lines have been muted to prevent any background noise during the program. However, if you have any questions for any of our presenters today, just type it in the questions box on the GoToWebinar console. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the session. As way of introduction, Merlin is a provider of comprehensive information technology solutions to the U.S. federal government. We are widely regarded as one of the foremost experts in cybersecurity, network performance management, data storage and cloud, and enterprise application offerings. What we do is implement innovative technology to solve complex problems by finding, implementing, and customizing solutions that work from companies like McAfee. McAfee provides data security and malware defense solutions for both personal computers and, more importantly for this webinar, the enterprise. Today we will be discussing how Merlin and McAfee are leading the charge to strengthen security measures with real-time memory and CPU monitoring that operates between the CPU and the OS, protecting components that reside in physical memory. Our presenters today are Scott Montgomery, Chief Technology Officer and VP of Public Sector for McAfee, John Duranio, Systems Engineer for McAfee, and Chris Calavas, Director of Innovation for Merlin. I'll now turn it over to our first speaker, Scott.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for coming. I'm going to go through this material reasonably quickly so that we have plenty of time for questions afterward. So this is a bit of a scare slide designed to make you want to go out and buy more products. But there's a couple of pretty important things on this slide. And they'll talk about how we can't continue to do things the way that we used to. We used to set a policy. We used to run the policy. We used to measure against how the policy did, rinse and repeat. And with the hockey stick effect going on here and the number of samples growing, just a 22% quarter over quarter from Q4 12 to Q1 13. And then an increase of 50% 2011 to 2012. We can't continue to manage the way that we used to. We have to be a little bit more proactive, and we have to utilize all of the tools available to us. And utilizing all of the tools available to us is basically the topic of what we're talking about today. You have a processor, more often than not, it's an Intel processor. And that processor has security capabilities built into it that are very, very deep in the operating system or actually below the operating system. And they're very leverageable, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And in particular, this is an area, when you do any form of trend analysis and you see this kind of increase of attacks quarter over quarter, year over year, and the numbers here, if you look at the left, we're talking about 100,000 unique master boot record threats or rootkits beginning in Q1 of 2010, which is when we saw this first uptick. And now, basically going on about 3 years later, we're seeing around 600,000 unique master boot record attack-related samples. And what this does is it demonstrates two things. Attackers, they run their projects a lot like you do. They're not omnipotent. They're not better at their craft than you are. They have a finite number of resources available to them. Now, it may be larger than your organization because they'll co-opt machines, but basically they do the same thing that you do. They define what constitutes success and what it'll cost them in order to get to that success. And what you see here in this form of trend analysis for this particular kind of attack is one where attackers have concluded that they can be successful, whether that's co-opting a machine at the hardware layer or as the operating system begins, which is what a rootkit does. You press power, the BIOS fires up. The very next thing that happens is that drivers are initialized. You may have a driver for your video card. You may have a device driver for your RAID array. You have device drivers for all sorts of stuff. And what this allows attackers to do is sit at that interpretive layer between the hardware itself and the CPU. It's a really good place to sit if you're an attacker. And this trend line will show you basically that attackers have decided that the view is worth the climb. This attack is something that gets them to success. They're able to emulate a driver that is interpreting CPU signals, or they're able to sit at the master boot record of the operating system and interpret what on the operating system fires or doesn't fire. It's a great place for an attacker to sit. They're being successful, and the cost in terms of manpower or elbow grease, so to speak, isn't so prohibitive that it's preventing them from doing it more and more. So what do we do about it? Basically, what you'll see here, and this is available through Merlin or through McAfee, it'll show basically how attackers divide their work, their project work. Okay, my project is gain access to a particular system. And this is how they break it up. They're going to try and find the system or find the person who uses the system. They're going to figure out a mechanism to get malware onto the system for the first time. They're going to basically take over a few key commands or mechanisms on the system in order to be able to survive. And then they're going to do what they set out to do. It could be the theft of intellectual property. It could be recording keystrokes. It could be the exfiltration of other kinds of documents or data. It could be database changes. We've seen an inordinate increase in the number of systems, database systems, where data is being changed, not necessarily deleted, not destroyed, and not able to be seen from the tampering standpoint, but the data itself is being changed. Very interesting. And then if we go on, if we overlay what McAfee does for a living, this is the only commercial I'm going to do. This is what McAfee says it does for a living with respect to how we overlay our endpoint technology onto those, if we go back for 1 second, so you see the phases of the attack: first contact, local execution, established presence, malicious activity. And then we overlay what McAfee does on those. There are a number of things where we're trying to detect right at first contact, where people are being probed or spearphished or other. But if you look at what we're talking about today, this is highlighted in green. We're talking about rootkit and master boot record tampering prevention, detection and prevention. And the McAfee Deep Defender technology is how we take care of that at McAfee. And it spans basically these local execution, established presence, and malicious activity phases because of where it sits. It sits both high and low, right at the processor level, and also inside of our agent technology. So what is Deep Defender? Deep Defender is basically, if you went to, and I'm not going to read this whole slide, but I'll give you the genesis behind it. Let's say you're Intel Corporation in about 2007. If you shook Intel Corporation awake in the middle of the night and said, what do you do for a living? They would say, we do power-efficient computing, and we do internet connectivity. Those are the two things that they said they did for a living. Well, you really can't do either one of those things with confidentiality, with integrity, with availability, without having security. And Intel came to that conclusion about 2007, 2008 timeframe, and executed a decision to acquire security technology in the form of McAfee. Once we were acquired, what they did was they came back and said, look, we want to take security all the way down to the silicon layer. How do we do that? And there was a collaborative effort. They put about 400 engineers on at Intel on this project to work with our host-based teams in order to basically take that level of protection beyond the OS, right down to the kernel level, right down to the real-time level, right down to the silicon level. And the point of it was so that we could prevent device drivers, and let's be clear, a device driver for a piece of hardware that isn't in the system is usually a dead giveaway that somebody's trying to be at that processor level. By sitting at the master boot record, by sitting at the driver level, they're able to interpret signals that even the OS isn't typically able to interpret, and it's a great place to sit. So this Deep Defender, it operates beyond the OS. It exposes malware that's targeted for that device driver or master boot record layer. It runs in conjunction with our agent so that we can report up through the application layer to our management technology and let you know of findings or things blocked or quarantined or eliminated. It's managed by the same EPO technology you may be using today. The EPO server that you may be using today can tell you which of your systems are applicable, which Intel Core processors that you have that are already running in your infrastructure that could leverage this Deep Defender technology. And then I'm going to point to, this is in the chart in the lower right, this is a test. We did not pay for this test. This was not a marketing test. This is an independent organization in Germany called AV Test. These are very, very sharp cookies. And what they did was they created 48 master boot record and device driver level pieces of malware and tried to inflict them on 3 systems. And the thing that's interesting, what this chart doesn't say, but we have Merlin has more information on this for you to read about if you'd like to. These catches, this 100% catch with the Deep Defender, was without the presence of any signatures at all. And the point of it was, this was exactly the point. If we need to evolve past this established policy, see how it did, rinse, repeat, because of the sheer number of threats that we're facing and the flat budgets and flat number of trained personnel, we need to establish better technology from the ground up. And that's why Intel buys McAfee. That's why Intel and McAfee build Deep Defender. So there's a little animation here, and I have to tell you, I'm not 100% certain it's going to work in the WebEx, but we're going to try it. So this is basically how Deep Defender works, and I'll walk through this. Basically, when you click power on in an Intel system with i3, i5, i7 technology, and the BIOS is VT enabled, and again, our EPO manager can tell you which of your systems have that blend. Before the OS loader and OS initialization occurs, we're going to interrupt that process, and we're going to start by the interactive Deep Safe or Deep Defender technology that works at the processor level before the operating system fires up. We're also, as the boot drive is occurring, we're going to load the Deep Defender agent as well. This layer is exactly where, and I'm hoping you guys are seeing this because I'm seeing it. Can one of the panelists please just send me a chat that we are seeing the animation? Somebody seeing that? Animation is seen. Awesome. Just like we drew it up on the whiteboard. Okay. So basically, because we're actually initializing processor-enabled protection and initializing an agent at the boot layer, we're actually seeing these rootkits as they are firing up. And there's two sort of dead giveaways for these. One is when a device driver is advertising itself for a piece of hardware that doesn't exist. This is usually a good reason to take a look at it and say, well, if you say you're the Hooby-Jooby driver and we don't have Hooby-Jooby hardware, why do we need to run you? The second one is, if you hadn't had a hardware change from the last time the system was booted, but you're seeing new drivers for a hardware change that didn't occur, this is also a dead giveaway. This is a really good place to say, if we didn't change anything And we're seeing new drivers for hardware that doesn't exist. Maybe we should take a look. During the boot process, there are other kinds of drivers, including the McAfee antivirus driver that initialize before the operating system is finished. There are some drivers that don't require the boot layer or the real-time layer, but operate at higher layers in the stack. But because we're already loaded, we're able to see these as well. And then finally, we correlate the Deep Defender agent at the application layer with the rest of our agent-based technology to say, first and foremost, when we get a hit, you should probably let the mothership or the EPO management software know. And you should take steps. What am I going to do now? How am I going to render these things inert? Am I going to quarantine, or am I going to remove them, etc.? So real-time level identifies kernel mode rootkits as they load in real time, loads before the OS, and it lets the application layer know, hey, this was a problem, but we dealt with it. Your Merlin folks know this stuff backward and forward. They're ready to help you. There's a number of things that are available as resources for you. You can take a look at the AV test, for example, the independent test. We didn't pay for it. If you'd like to try this technology, it's the barrier to entry is very low, and Merlin and McAfee would love to help you. With that, I'm going to turn the malware back over to Doug for our next presenter.
Great. Thank you, Scott, so much. That was great. Our next presenter is John Duranio, and I pass that on to you.
Hi, everyone. John Duranio here, a sales engineer in the systems integration and energy team for McAfee. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can move on to the next piece here. So I just wanted to basically highlight a recent win here for one of my customers that was evaluating this technology. And there's a lot of drivers that lead customers to look at different solutions. And I think as far as the landscape goes for security, a lot of times they do look at what's out there first, obviously, which is what we encourage. But what we found is this one particular customer kept coming back to us, and what they were challenged with was getting rid of the APTs that they had on their network. So we talked to them about solutions that they had in place. They did have a SIM. They also had a sandboxing solution they were trying to use to stop this outbreak. And then, us as the AV. But what they wanted to do was basically take a look at, again, the full removal. And so we talked to them about the integration now of Deep Defender into our latest CEE suite, which came out this year. And they got very, very interested. And so we did some testing. And I can tell you that from, within a few weeks of them testing, they were very, very happy and satisfied. So this was one of my first customers that did this rollout. It's going on now over the next few months. The very large company, you can see they've got millions of customers. It's very critical that these kinds of networks not go down, right? This particular area, there's a lot of regulatory bodies as well that get involved in any kinds of outages. So you can imagine they were very, very motivated to stop this issue. And they could not find any other technology available. They had looked at some other, let's say, application whitelisting technologies and so on. We're a little bit concerned about the security actually around one of those particular vendors, and came back to us. And again, Deep Defender was the only way that they found, again, from the time the system booted, as Scott had mentioned, to the time it started up, that they could have full assurance that those systems were safe and clean and could come back online and provide energy back out to the grid again, right? So this is, again, a typical kind of customer. We wanted to kind of highlight that for everybody, but we'd be happy to talk about and answer any questions that you might have around their testing, their rollout, and so on. So with that, I'll pass that back out. I know it's we're about halfway through the webinar here, but questions are very important, so please feel free to send those out.
Thank you, John. And our next presenter is Chris Calabas from Merlin. And Chris, go for it.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Again, my name is Chris Calabas. I am the Director of Innovation here at Merlin. And hopefully I can actually take control of this and go forth. It doesn't seem that I can actually do anything at this point. So there we go. Excellent. Can I go forward? Fantastic. So I'd like to take a time to talk about the goals of Merlin and how it identifies technology and integrates or even augments these technology components into our cyber solutions. I'd like to talk a little bit about our cybersecurity focus areas. And then lastly, I'd like to talk about the federal challenge today and how we meet it with tools using Deep Defender. Merlin kind of has an integrated process. We like to, we provide comprehensive information technology solutions to the federal government, and we're widely regarded as as foremost experts in the cybersecurity. We deliver these turnkey solutions to solve complex and critical problems while fulfilling government mission areas. But in order to do that, we're dedicated to innovating these new solutions and discovering and testing these technologies using tools like our on-site lab in order to change the dynamic of how federal agencies can meet their mission requirements in the constructs of their ever-changing budget. Next slide, please. So who does Merlin serve? We serve all the government agencies. All the agencies across the defense, civilian, and healthcare agencies. We take a very modular approach to how we do our solutions. It allows us to then tailor these solutions because we come with a construct that allows us to take an approach and take reuse using best-of-breed practices, and allows us to then tailor the solution, a very small piece of the solution, explicit for the end user, while using proven practices that we continually to grow. We do this through these best practices by employing standard processes like ISO 9000, PMI, CMMI, and ITIL, as well as best practices to achieve exceptional performance from our solutions. Next slide. So we have many areas of focus that we have, and in particular, digital forensics, incident management, and threat detection are some of those. But in particular, one of our pillars are the antivirus malware protection. But up until now, there have been gaps. But we're trying to build a security program without gaps. So we're trying to take a holistic approach to cybersecurity solutions by leveraging our best-of-breed IT technologies and complementing our full complement of professional services to do this. And we can do this now because we now have Deep Defender to close that gap. Closing this gap allows us to go from the hardware, bare metal area, all the way up through the operating system and above, to have a full assessment of the information that should be and has been certified to be on such systems. Next slide, please. So the government has millions of computing devices, but the question is, how many need to be infected before the real damage? Just one. The Snowden. I mean, that's the major example. It only takes one. This is ultimately an arms race. Once one person gets a deadly attack, another one comes up and they establish beachheads in the unmonitored areas of your IT fabric, and you can't afford to have these unmonitored areas. In particular, traditional antivirus solutions monitor and protect from the operating system up, but they're not monitoring from the operating system and below. Most departments just don't know that this is going on their computers in their space, and this causes a huge vulnerability, and as we saw before, can just literally cause havoc throughout your entire infrastructure. And up until now, there just hasn't been a tool. So through McAfee's Deep Defender, it gives us the tools we need to monitor this risky area. Next slide, please. So what is Merlin's answer? We know that our customers are overwhelmed with their priorities, so we need to be selective in what we choose. The potential for wreaking havoc from this position below the operating system is extremely high, and with the lack of visibility to the from with and below the operating system and its complete access to all computing resources is important. Going forward, we're going to be recommended to our customers and prospects that McAfee Deep Defender be added to all current antivirus implementation. This is a priority in the truest sense. I only read that particular section because it's so important. On the operating system, especially with virtual machines, especially with all kinds of things from virtualization and above, there are plenty of solutions out there, including McAfee solution sets. But going below it is absolutely critical. We have found it time and time again. There would be a gap in technology, and this tool and solution absolutely meets that. Since Deep Defender can be added easily to the existing antivirus deployment and monitored through the McAfee's EPO or e-policy orchestrator, it's an easy solution to implement, and it addresses a little known but potentially devastating risk. And I hope you enjoyed my part of my presentation, and I'll hand it back.
Thanks, Chris. I guess we'll now open it up for questions. I have a couple of questions here. The first one is, when installing this for a customer, how many threats does Deep Defender typically uncover? And I guess that's one of the McAfee guys.
So this is Scott. I'm happy to take that. If you take a look, I don't know if I can do this or not. I'm going to try. Can I go back? I don't know if I can go back. Okay, good. I can. Good. Awesome. Vroom. Okay. So look at and I'm sorry that the numbers on the left column got munged. You know, you're looking at 14 million new malware samples of a variety of different types. Trojans, viruses, worms, just whatever. But when you drill down into these particular threats, you're seeing a fairly small fraction of the overall are these rootkits. The challenge is that, like Chris mentioned, it only takes one driver-level threat on a machine to basically be yielding up everything that machine's capable of doing. So when we do install the Deep Defender technology, it may only be a couple of device drivers that are suspect that we see. But the two things that are important about that are, one, we're removing the really, really low-level access of your adversary that day. And two, we're preventing low-level access from returning, even without the presence of signatures for their device drivers. And that second element is paramount, because you may be installing this into an area where you may have limited bandwidth or no bandwidth, depending on the type of system that it is. And what we're finding is that after we've done that initial cleaning, because we report on the hardware state the second time, I've booted this machine, I'm seeing these drivers for hardware we don't own. You know, you don't really need a signature at that point. You say, what's this driver doing? Well, it's not interpreting signals between hardware and the CPU for purpose of driving the hardware. It's recording keystrokes. Well, okay, that doesn't seem like a good thing to load up at boot time. Does that answer your question? Can you chat to the commentator? Super.
All right, I guess we'll try a second question then. Do you still need a mechanism to identify approved updates?
Do you still need a mechanism to identify? Oh, you mean, okay, I'm guessing. It could be it sounds to me like potentially the questioner is saying, well, what happens when I do power the machine off and swap out one video card for another one? Let's say I go from an ATI card to a Radeon card. Well, the device driver is going to be different. And yes, that's true, but we're also looking at the behavior of the new driver as well. So instead of just saying, okay, it's a new driver, therefore by definition it must be bad, we're doing two things. One, we're actually able in the Intel hardware to record the last known hardware state. So when you do perform a shutdown and a hardware change, we can say, you know, we probably should be expecting a new driver because we changed hardware. But also, if there is an updated driver version by the same manufacturer, and that is applied between reboots, what we're doing is, again, we're looking at the behavior of that driver as well to try and establish whether it's malware. If that didn't answer your question, go ahead and re-ask, please.
And while we're waiting for that, we have another question. How does Deep Defender work with VDI systems and other virtual platforms?
Yeah. I haven't tried this on a VDI yet. John, is your customer using this on VDI?
No, not currently. They deploy mainly to physical servers first. But you know, as far as you know, that was a good question. So we can take that offline. And
yeah, I would say so. First and foremost, I would say that because we're firing up before even bare metal hypervisors, what you're going to see is hardware detection change being enacted at that boot up, which can give you not only MBR but BIOS attestation as well. Are we going to know what's going on with respect to a software driver change in a virtual machine where that hardware may be represented someplace else? I think the answer is probably not, but I'd like to take that offline. With respect to the hardware hosting on the actual machine, yes. With respect to how a VM shows up at the OS layer up, I really don't know the answer to that. I think you're still accomplishing your Deep Defender mission, even without a tie to the VDI software machine. But let's take it offline.
All right, here's another question. What metrics for the behavior are you investigating for further review?
Let me think what I can say without... Well, first and foremost, Intel hardware gives you hardware attestation for the last known boot state, and that's the first thing we check. And there's nothing magical about that. And in fact, they offer the ability to do that to any independent software vendor. We think we're probably a couple years ahead just because of who writes our checks, and because they said you're going to need to do what, you know, this first step. Very important for us to do it. It yielded some great things. So the first thing is to use the existing hardware attestation to say what changed. The second thing is to say, is the hardware that changed mirrored by one or more drivers? So the presence of multiple drivers for the same piece of changed hardware isn't necessarily always a good thing. There could be those occasions, but it bears more scrutiny. And then the last one is when you get a driver mismatch for a driver that's asking for master boot record level or hardware that doesn't exist on the system, particularly when that driver is arriving after a boot for the first time. I think that's probably all I can go into without an NDA.
Okay, we have another question on just platforms. Does Deep Defender work on specific Intel chip versions or older chips too? Does it work in Apple or Linux environments?
So it's Intel. It's Intel i3, i5, and i7 chipsets with the VT-enabled BIOS. And if you're an EPO user, there's actually a pretty cool knowledge base article that will tell you how to check which systems meet the Deep Defender criteria. So if you knowledge base to McAfee, there's actually a KB article that will walk you through doing a query for your Deep Defender systems. I think the only caveat is you have to be on 4.6 or above for EPO.
That's correct. And that covers literally, if you think about it, every Intel chip that's come out in probably the past 5 years. So it's a pretty wide, group of systems that'll be covered by it.
It's definitely, yeah, it might not be 5, but it's definitely more than, 1 or 2 or 3. It's a lot of chips. If you go to the knowledge base and you look at that query, you're going to know that minute, hey, here's the gadgets that I own that could run this and which can't.
Okay, then one more question. Does Deep Defender work on all clients that McAfee's antivirus software currently protects, or are there some limitations? Would this work on mobile devices as well?
Not presently. Intel doesn't have a huge mobile footprint like ARM does. So again, it's i3, i5, i7, so you're not going to get Androids unless it's, there's some Android tablets that are using Intel processor technology, but I don't know if we've extended the ability to use this to an Android platform. I would guess probably not yet.
Okay, next question. What's the default reaction by Deep Defender when there is a detection, and how can it impact the system availability and user experience? Let me know if you need me to repeat that.
I'm noodling on it.
I can answer that, Scott, if you want.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to know what the customer's experience was. I think they only used it on servers, but the effect would be the same.
You're going to have to do a reboot, because as you're deploying it, the first time that you deploy it out there, when it comes up during that reboot is when it's going to identify any of the rootkits that are on the system, right? So, and it has to come all the way up into the OS for the removal piece of it. So it's really important. There's really two things that happen. One is the Deep Defender finds it, identifies it, and then once the OS comes up, it's isolated that threat, and that's where the VTX piece comes in, because it's putting it into a virtual space and memory that's isolated from the OS. But you're going to then use the McAfee AV that's on the system also to do the full removal, because there's still going to be, we call it cruft, right, that's going to be out there in the OS as well, and other potential, reinstall calls and other things that might be on the system. So it's got to come all the way up that first time, do that full removal, and then do a second reboot. So you're talking about a 2 reboot in order to remove if something is identified, or just a single reboot when you're doing deployment. And that's essentially the end user impact that you have.
Here's another question. Is there a way to make an analogous, God, I can't speak, relationship to DD versus Microsoft device certification process? Analogous.
I'm guessing this is for digital signatures as they relate to the drivers we'd be examining. If it's that, I would say I'm not sure that the view would be worth the climb. I guess if the asker may be curious about false positives, where we're quarantining a machine, even though the driver has been properly signed through the Microsoft driver assurance program. I guess it's possible. I have not seen that. I'm not. I won't be that guy that says that could never happen. Yeah, I suppose it could happen, but I'm not sure that integration with the signature program helps you, because what you're doing then is saying, if I accept at face value that the driver that's signed by Microsoft is never going to be malware and never look at it, I think that's just very contrary to the way we do business. We're going to look at things that you tell us to look at. And if it turns out to be digitally signed by Microsoft properly but still is malware, you're going to be mad at us if we don't catch it, not at Microsoft for signing a piece of malware. So I'm not sure if the linkage is a good one.
Someone has asked, what if it's a false positive detection?
Yeah, you're going to wind up with the machine temporarily in an unbootable state. Now EPO, just like every other process, is going to pop you an alert. You can also create a trigger in EPO where the administrator gets a remedy ticket, for example, or an SMS, or a variety of other things for that occasion where we've caught a driver and the machine requires physical attention. That's good, great, but the process would be exactly the same for that time that we've quarantined the system unexpectedly and with a false positive. I'm not going to be that person that tells you that it couldn't possibly happen. The one thing I will tell you is that for this particular technology, as you could see from our results, let me see if I can't move this thing again. Hang on. Are you moving? You going? Hello? Somebody who can advance the slides a little. Hello? All right. When you look at these decks later, oh, maybe that was me. All right, keep going. Whoever that is, keep going. Keep going. One more click. Stop. Whoever that is, stop. Okay. So terribly sorry about that, guys. If you look at the chart here, again, these are I would say that the likelihood of a false positive is dramatically increased when you need signatures. But because we're utilizing the hardware and we're utilizing attestation models and we're utilizing some behavioral analysis, the likelihood that we're going to encounter a false positive is a fraction of what it would be if we're relying on dead from the neck up signatures. So, and what this little chart doesn't say is that we didn't experience a false positive through their test. Now, they only did 48 rootkits, but like we talked about before, rootkits, there's not 10 million of them out there because it does require a little bit of sophistication to build one. Is it bulletproof? No, nothing's bulletproof. Otherwise, I'd be playing golf for a living and not doing this. But I would say that this particular technology, because it's hardware-based, you're going to get lower thresholds, far lower thresholds of false positives.
Here's another question. Does Deep Defender use Artemis technology?
All right, you've stumped me. I don't know. John, do we do an Artemis lookup for these?
I'll be the second stumped panelist today. So
that's a great question.
Yeah, we have to look that one up, but Yeah, because it's coming up at boot time, it can't really reach out.
I don't think you would have a TCP stack available to you to do one. Now, do we do one
once you're in the operating system
after the fact? That's a great, man, that's a, whew. If we have a Starbucks card to send that dude, we probably should do it. It's a good one. I would guess not. I would guess that we do not.
At least not during the boot
if we've captured the one or two guys that we said, hey, we'll take it offline, we'll get you a definitive yes or no. I will tell you that in late model EPO, where you're utilizing some of our technology to record what executables and what things are requesting CPU time, particularly if you're utilizing our application whitelisting, you could request an Artemis lookup of something you didn't recognize. So we have a way to do that for sure. Do we have a way to do it that moment? I would say the answer is probably not. That's a money one. That's really good.
Okay, one more question. If I am a current McAfee antivirus and ePolicy orchestrator user, how long would it take to add this to my current infrastructure and get it up and running?
Yeah, this is a great question. Ironically enough, the barrier to entry for this stuff is actually really, really low. Like I said earlier, there's a KB article that'll tell you which systems are eligible to run this. It'll even tell you, I believe, a lot of people, if you're a DoD organization in particular, you may have been forced to turn off certain technology, Intel technology in your BIOS. And this will give you the ability to say, yes, we have the proper BIOS, but this aspect of it is disabled. Do you want me to turn it on at the next reboot? And then the Deep Defender technology itself, it delivers like a frame pack. So just like any other package you'd put through the EPO technology. So if you like us for frame pack technology, great. If you're on a lot of very latent links to your systems, you know, you may want to use something else to deliver the frame pack. The size of it is really not that huge either.
We have had the opportunity to run through every audience question that we've received. Just one last call to the audience. If you want to have any questions, type it in now. Otherwise, we'll move.
I would also
close.
ask the audience, you know, if you have a second, please go ahead and send Doug and the Merlin team feedback. Let us know how we did. We want to be here for you. If you found the hour valuable, that's great. If you have some suggestions, we're all ears. We'd really we're here to help you.
We do have one more question. Can Deep Defender be temporarily turned off through EPO or the AV agent console on the desktop?
Yes and no. Yes, EPO. I do not think you can turn it off on the local agent.
Depends on policy. I believe it depends on policy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chris is a smart guy. I believe him.
Okay, with that, we've run through all of our questions. So I guess at this point, I will say thank you, Scott, John, and Mark. It was a pleasure having you present at our webcast. And thanks to all of you who attended.